To believe there is no God is not actually to make the world simpler. It is to make the world unintelligible, without sense, without meaning, and without logic. It's to believe that this vast array arose from nothing and that it will return to nothing. It's to believe that morality, the basis on which all human beings either base their conduct or claim they should base their conduct, is ephemeral, is created by us, can be violated by us, really in the end is as much of a human contrivance as this podium, this stage, your clothes, your car. And means as much ultimately, because if you decide to violate it, there is no order built into the universe because there is no intended universe. Which means that not only is there not a moral order, but really the illusion that somehow you make choices in this world is just that, an illusion. Without a God, where do you get your free will from? You don't get it from your genes, you don't get it from your environment. It's an illusion, and everything you have decided from coming here this evening to the person whom you've chosen to marry, to the profession you've chosen to enter, to what you had for breakfast, all of that was determined from the beginning of time by these blind forces that we are told to believe are in fact the only sovereign of the universe. But there is more than that. We also have to believe that every human being throughout history, millions and billions of them, who have been captured by a sense and a vision of something greater than themselves, who have felt transcendence, who have lived in sanctity, who have believed that they are connecting to something, to someone, to divinity, to eternity, that they are all fools, dullards, that in fact all they're promulgating is poison and all they're believing is lies. That everyone that we would call a saint or a tzaddik was in fact credulous, gullible, beguiled and wrong. And worst of all, it means that the person sitting next to you, into whose eyes you can look, was just an accident of ancient chemistry, is all synapse and no soul, is just material. There's nothing noble about them any more than there's anything noble about pure chemical biological life. They came from nothing as the universe and returned to nothing. There is no eternity inside of them or inside of you. I don't believe it, and I don't think you should believe it. And as the evening progresses, I will try to make the argument not just that believing in God makes sense, but that it makes us better as individuals and as a people. And not only on the basis of the fact that religious people in study after study give more to charity, volunteer more, do everything from giving more blood to voting more often, but also that if you have lived a life of faith and in a community of faith, you know that it is true that you are constantly challenged to be better, that the dissatisfaction that you feel with the world is a dissatisfaction that is spurred on by the certainty that human beings are meant to be noble and meant to be good and intended for better things. I can't tell you what God is. Martin Buber said, the great Jewish philosopher, that God can't be expressed, only addressed. In other words, I can't tell you about God, but I can talk to God. And when I do, and I hope when you do, you understand that this is not a vain thought flung up at an empty universe, but that you are talking to something real, more real than that which you can see. And that if you don't believe in the reality of the intangible, the invisible, that which you cannot see, then you have a peculiar form of blindness. And that if you live in God's presence, then though at times you may feel as though the world doesn't live up to the expectations and hopes that you were taught, that it doesn't always realize what it is that you believe God's world should be, you know that there is hope, that there is possibility, that faith is real, and that God is present. Thank you.
Shalom. Good faith requires that I suppose the best of my antagonist, that when he said that religious people voted more often, he meant to say more diligently, or more thoroughly, or so.
Right. Not like Texas.
Because
no.
it could be said that Tammany Hall was a Catholic defense organization and a generally confessional and faith-based outfit. I know that's not the sort of level to which we'll be descending tonight. No, it would be far better, I think, if I said why I don't think it's terrifying to imagine that we are alone, and how much more terrifying it would be and more horrible it would be to imagine that we were permanently supervised and invigilated. So I'll have to begin from exactly the opposite end of the moral and ethical spectrum from the one that Rabbi Wolpe chose. Thomas Jefferson said in a phrase that's so haunting that once you've heard it, you can't forget it. He said, "I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just." He thought he could discern a pattern. He was a deist. He did think that there was meaning in the observable universe, and he writes this in these words, unforgettable words, in the notes on the state of Virginia, and you can guess the subject that he's writing about. And you can guess what revenge he thinks the divine might take on these United States for its original sin of slavery. But I would reply in the following terms. If you presume that there is a just God, then really what is there to tremble about? Think of the thing that's worrying you most this evening. Think of the thing that's upset you most this week, or that you're most afraid of, for yourself or your loved ones, or your children, your relatives. It would dissolve into a tiny concern if you knew there was a just God. Everything would assume a completely different proportion. At once, there's a just God? What matters it, my trivial worries? But if there isn't a just God, if there isn't a permanent supervision that's all for your own good, and if you don't think that's a sinister idea, as I do, then it will follow that you may have to get rid of slavery on your own account. You may have to take the responsibility upon yourself as a human. You may have to invoke humanism and human solidarity and say, this cannot stand. I cannot live as a human while another person is in bondage. And I submit, just to begin with, just so you understand our difference properly, that is a much more noble and ethical and also much more logically probable position than the idea that one can refer these dilemmas upward to a supernatural dictatorship, to a celestial totalitarianism that may or may not be just, but we had better hope, since we believe in its existence, does care about us. In other words, that reduces us to the abject and much more to the random and the unconsidered than any scientific concept would do. Think about that little girl in Somalia. Think of what Jefferson said on another occasion about how only by one vote, because one man was sick, the Northwestern Ordinance on the abolition of slavery didn't pass. He said one man was sick and missed the vote, and it went the wrong way, and he said, and heaven was silent. Heaven was silent in that awful moment. Well, now just you transfer yourself to Somalia last week. Girl of 13, probably out for the first time unsupervised in her life. Things must have been very bad if she was allowed out without male supervision to begin with, but there's enough chaos to explain that. She's immediately pounced upon by a group of older men and very thoroughly raped and sodomized and beaten. And she goes to the religious court for redress. And the religious court knows its business, and it knows its texts very well. And it says, we don't know that it's true that what you say, that men abused you in this manner, but we can tell you've had sex. In fact, judging by your injuries, we can tell you've had a great deal of sex lately. But you're not married, so you're guilty of adultery. So now, before your wounds have stopped hurting, you're going to be buried up to your waist in hot sand, and laughing men will now take part in the only other cultural activity that gratifies the male sex in that part of the world, which is stoning a young woman to death. The people who did this knew exactly what they were doing, and they were in perfect conformity with their holy books, and they absolutely do not believe that anything happens randomly. They are not under the illusion that heaven is indifferent. They're not under the illusion that we are biologically created, that we're here because of the laws of natural selection and random mutation. They don't believe anything of the sort. They're utterly consoled by the idea that heaven intervenes and cares about every action. Otherwise, they wouldn't put themselves to the trouble of raping, torturing, and murdering a 13-year-old whose last moments you might want to take just a few seconds to imagine. It is not true, as is sometimes suggested by the people who've misread the brothers Karamazov and the speech by Smerdyakov in that great book, who says that if there's no God, then anything is possible. To the contrary, make the assumption that there is a celestial totalitarian dictator, and then absolutely any crime and cruelty is not just thinkable, but maybe required of you. Is the suicide bombing community, I invite you to ask yourselves, comrades, brothers, sisters, ladies and gentlemen, is it a secular community? Is the genital mutilation community a secular community? I don't think you'll find that it is. What are the historic justifications of slavery and genocide? There was slavery and genocide before monotheism, but monotheism codified and said that it was acceptable to do and carry out these appalling atrocities. You may be an atheist. One may be an atheist and be a nihilist. One may be an atheist and be a sadist. One may be an atheist and be a moral relativist or a fascist. Very unlikely the last one, I mean. Most fascists were very devout Christians, but it's almost mandatory if you're a Stalinist to be an atheist. It's not a position on its own, but it avoids the absolutely critical cruelty, which is that says that we owe a duty as original sinners to someone who created us ill, created us sick, and then ordered us on pain of torture and death to cure ourselves. And in the meantime mandated every kind of violence against womanhood, contempt for womanhood, cruelty against our fellow creatures, superstitious and crazed belief that it's possible to imagine. So I think that in the struggle for emancipation, which is where I began, and the one in which Mr. Jefferson, with half his heart and half his head, was able to take part, the very first cruelty and shackle to throw off is the man-forged manacle that is religion. Thank you.
I want to address mistakes both large and small, and I want to start with large. First of all, if you believe that religion is what causes violence in human society, then you have to look at human society when it was without the monotheistic faiths. Mr. Hitchens talked about what the world was like for Greece and Rome and Assyria and Babylonia and all the ancient cultures who committed serial genocides but didn't feel that that was against their principles. And in fact, why did Rome fall? Because, according to the greatest historian of the Roman Empire, Gibbon, Christianity was too peaceful. And all these Roman soldiers that slaughtered took on these Christian ideas of pacifism and self-abnegation, and the barbarian hordes came in and overwhelmed them. And even though it is true that religion sometimes mandates terrible things, that's terrible religion. And when you extract it from the world as happened from the French Revolution on. What you get are the Napoleonic Wars, World War I, World War II, communism, Nazism. As horrific as some of these things are, is there anyone who can say that the explicitly atheistic ideologies of communism and Nazism, and I was interested that Mr. Hitchens began his address by saying, comrades, those ideas, I'm just noting.
Bring it on.
Those ideas resulted in the systematic slaughter of untold millions of people, all in the name of an ideology that burned churches, expelled God, and said that essentially what we are is just animals. And then there were mistakes that were smaller, like genital mutilation. By this, what Mr. Hitchens means is circumcision. And I just happen to have an article here. It's remarkable. That circumcision cuts the rate of HIV infection in heterosexual men by more than 50%, and the results were so striking of this study that the National Institute of Health decided it would be unethical to continue the study, so they stopped it and joined the World Health Organization in advocating circumcision worldwide, or, as Mr. Hitchens would have it, genital mutilation. I don't think that such things ought to be spoken of lightly. These are, in fact, deeply held beliefs. And there are fanatics and fundamentalists in religion as there are outside of religion, but that is, after all, not the essential content of religion. In fact, the essential content of religion is not that heaven intervenes all the time. It isn't true that religious people expected God to end slavery. After all, the humanists of the ancient world, Lucretius, Epictetus, Epicurus, none of them objected to slavery. It was Moses who freed the slaves. It was John Brown, an evangelical, who worked for abolition in America. It was Wilberforce, an evangelical, who worked for abolition in England. In fact, the idea that slavery is wrong is an idea that has religious roots in the notion that every human being is in the image of God, therefore every human being has the right to be free. If after all you are is an animal, why is it wrong to enslave you? There is no rule above you and me, and power makes right. And that is what the brothers Karamazov was warning against, and that is what Nietzsche celebrated, the idea that not goodness, not God, but power is the arbiter of the world. The 20th century tested that idea, the idea that power should supplant God, and the result was the most savage, bloody, regrettable, and awful century in the long and difficult history of humanity. We know better now, and we shouldn't fall for it again.
Again, willing to establish a millimeter or so of common ground, I will say that you're right, nothing to do with my penis should be taken lightly. But if you read what the sages say about the recommendation of circumcision, Maimonides in particular, about the peria mestiza, you will find that it's exactly the same as the Islamic and animist recommendations in the case of the female. The point of it is not to protect against a disease no one had then heard of, but to, as far as possible, blunt the feeling of the sexual organ, male or female. And if you'll just allow your minds and imaginations free play, comrades, brothers and sisters, and ask yourself how much crime and misery and suffering has been the result of just of sexual repression, which is one of religion's main businesses, and the repression of the female gender, another of religion's main businesses, I think you won't want for examples, you won't lack for examples at that point. And so I'll just rest my case there. By the way, what the World Health Organization is talking about is a bit of loosening of the foreskin. Let's not go into too much detail here. It's not the full excision, the tearing off, the blunting, the dulling of the whole cock, if I may borrow an expression. And there's all the difference in the world. And by the way, this should matter to women as much as to men, if you ask me. Right. Now, I knew that it would come up at some point. We may as well get it out of the way now. It always comes up at these discussions. What about the relationship of secularism to totalitarianism? I invite the question, obviously. The rabbi put his case very well, but he overlooks the 3 or 4 most salient points about it. 20th century totalitarianism, I'll be quick. If you take out the word fascism or fascist in any account of 20th century totalitarianism and just put in Catholic right wing, you don't have to change a thing. You don't have to change a thing. From Portugal to Croatia to Spain to Vichy to Bavaria to Slovakia, where the head of the Nazi puppet state was actually a priest in holy orders, it's the same. It's the Vatican right wing. That's what fascism is. National Socialism, and by the way, the Vatican had a concordat with every single one of those governments from Franco to Mussolini to the Ustasha in Croatia. Fact, pure historical fact. Nothing secular about fascism, which is the origin of National Socialism. National Socialism, Hitler never announced his Catholicism. The Vatican also had a concordat with his government. It was the first treaty the Nazis ever signed. Prayers were said on Hitler's birthday by order of the Pope in every church in Germany, every Catholic church. The Protestants joined in so as not to be left out. The ideology of anti-Semitism and anti-Bolshevism was borrowed by the Nazis from the Catholic ideology of the time. Nothing secular about that. I'm sure Hitler wanted in the end to replace Christianity with the worship of himself and the restoration of some Nordic gods, but don't you be calling that, Rabbi, don't you call that secular. So that's for the so-called right wing. I'll be quick on the left. Picture yourself being Joseph Stalin, graduate of a seminary in Georgia. Would have made a perfectly good bishop if he'd stuck around that seminary. He's in charge of Russia, which for hundreds of years has been told, its peasantry has been told, the Tsar is a man above men. He's not just the head of the state, he's the head of the church. He's not divine, but he's a little more than human. Serfdom and Tsarism justified completely by the Russian Orthodox Church. You have a huge reservoir of credulity and servility ready for you to exploit. You shouldn't be in the dictatorship business if you don't mimic that. Stalin invents an inquisition. He invents the show trial. Doesn't have to invent it, he borrows it. He borrows the idea of the devil, the permanent evil, trying to undermine his rule. The idea that the leader is always to be thanked, that there are miracles in the form of Lysenko's biology. It's nothing but a religious state in mimicry and simulacrum. I could go on and describe why I know from experience that North Korea is the most worshipful state in the world. For your point, Rabbi, to stand, you'd have to say and prove the following. You'd have to point to a society in which the ideas of Epicurus, Galileo, Spinoza, Jefferson, Bertrand Russell, Sigmund Freud, Albert Einstein had become the dominant ideas of that society, and show why that adoption had led that country into slavery, bankruptcy, tyranny, and paranoia. And you won't ever be able to point that out, because the more the societies do gravitate towards those ideas, the more they thrive, flourish, and prosper, because they've left the childhood of our species behind and the dark myths of religion along with them. Thank you.
David, you have to come over here now.
But this is a crucial point. This really is a crucial point. Can we stand up here for one more second and just finish thrashing this out?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm not going anywhere.
Oh, good. First of all, I don't think you want to build a society on the ideas of Epicurus, who didn't like poetry and didn't like music, and also Galileo, who was a believer. So we have built communities. Galileo, whose famous statement was that the Bible is not supposed to teach you how the heavens go, but how to go to heaven. But what you may not know is that he was quoting the Cardinal Bellarmine, who was one of the scientifically sympathetic cardinals in the Vatican. So the division is not as clear as you think, and frankly, I'm not sure you really want to build a society on the ideas of Freud, but maybe you do. But more crucial is not the idea that religion, first of all, religion didn't invent otherness, right? All you have to do is go to a playground. What happens when a new kid comes to the playground? Right? Do the other children say, "Ooh, I'm going to be the first one to share"? No. They say, "Who's that new kid?" Right? The idea that a different group, a different person, an outside country, an outside religion is inimical to you is built into the human system. But The difference is, when you take religious ideas and make them secular, you have to ask yourself not why did Stalin adopt religious ideas, but why, when they were just religious ideas, did they never produce a Stalin? Not why was Hitler able to cow the church, but why did you have to take the church out to produce a Hitler? It's not that religion never instantiates bad ideas or anger or distance or cruelty. It does. Of course it does. But if you think that by taking the religion out, what you get is a perfect, pure human being, the opposite is the case. Right? If you want to talk about tyranny, look at North Korea and South Korea. North Korea, which Mr. Hitchens says is a religious state in the sense that it worships a person. South Korea, though, is a flourishing democracy that is a Christian state. Where would you rather live? In South Korea, is life perfect? No. Do people discriminate against people? Is there cruelty? Is there crime? Is there avarice? Is there greed? Is there hatred? Absolutely. But you have to take the religion out of it to get a North Korea. And that's the point. Not that religion is perfect. We can spend all night talking about the depredations of religion. But religion seeks to make people better. It doesn't always, but it seeks to do that. And when you extract it from a society, you don't get a better society. You get a totalitarian society. You get the 20th century.
Gentlemen, they want us to continue our conversation over there.
Will you? That's up to you. Go ahead. I'll go sit. You finish.
Well, listen. South Korea is not a Christian country. It's a partially Catholic one. It's a partly Confucian one. It's a secular society, actually. One of the reasons for its success.
With a flourishing
and with
Christian
religious pluralism, but no official religion.
Right.
And no inculcation of religion by the state. In North Korea, the leader of the country is a dead person. When George Bush writes to Kim Jong-il, the dear leader, he calls him Mr. Chairman, not Mr. President. Why is that? You ever noticed this? Because Kim Jong-il, the dear leader, the son, is the head of the Communist Party and head of the armed forces. He's not president. The office of president is held by his father, who's been dead for 15 years. So it's a necrocracy. Or a thanatocracy, or a mausolocracy. These are the terms I've tried. And official teaching is the son is the reincarnation of his father. Mark this. And both their births were miraculous. So they're just one short of a trinity. And everyone has to worship all the time. And how can you tell it's religious? Because they have to thank all the time. They have to thank all the time. Thank you, thank you, thank you for all you've done for me. Thank you, thank you, thank you, dear and great ones, for all you do for me. Just as they say will happen in paradise. But the difference is this, if there is one, at least you can fucking well die and leave North Korea. You can defect that way. You can't get out of monotheism that way at all. It's when you die that the supreme leader really starts to work on you. Are you glad this happens? You think this is freedom, this is emancipation? I pity you if you do. And I'll repeat to you now, we'll move, I'll abuse my position, ask the question I asked you at the shul in Park Avenue. If you could have your way and you saw a new child being born tonight in Saudi Arabia, would you wish that child to grow up as a Wahhabi Muslim, or would you hope that he became an atheist? I think a lot depends on your answer.
I'll answer.
Sure. And I'll sit down.
First of all, I'm sorry, go ahead, please. First of all, I just want to say that I decline your offer to defend the Trinity. But the answer is that those are not the only two choices. And that's in part what I think is objectionable about the approach. You're suggesting that either you are an out-and-out atheist, or you must have some sort of fanatic, awful, cruel belief in one or another sect of religion. And what I'm saying is, what I would want for that child is that he would average the approaches and end up to be a moderate Muslim, as there are hundreds of millions in the world, And that would be far better, not only for Saudi Arabia, because maybe he would influence some of his co-religionists, but also for him, because I think his relation to God would be more authentic.
Well, I mean, that's a beautifully warm and furry reply.
I'm a warm and furry sort of guy.
I did give you permission to sort of imagine what you might like, and you thought of all the things you might like. You know, he wouldn't just be a moderate Muslim, he'd be nice to animals and good to his sister and so on. No, wait a minute. Do you really wish that my wish that this society be secularized and religion and state religion be brought into contempt and thought of as the main obstacle to progress, would that not be better for you than continuing adhesion to faith? I still think that's a perfectly good question. But I accept your answer.
It's the sort of equivalent of my saying to you, would you rather that child be born a Stalinist or a conservative Jew? And you would say those aren't the only two choices. And I would say, you know what, you're right, they're not the only two choices, and I hope that you'll give me the same concession.
It seems like
by the way, you can be a Stalinist and a conservative.
It seems like what you're getting at is well, a couple things, but one was a question I had for you, Christopher. What is wrong with a moderate religion? What's wrong with, say, liberal Judaism, which doesn't see, doesn't see the scriptures as divinely written?
The main thing that's wrong with it is that it doesn't give me enough to argue with. And that there's something, and that I have to tell you this, I find there's something a little bit cowardly about it, and evasive. The night before I first debated Rabbi Wolpe in New York, I was debating with Douglas Wilson of Christianity Today, who's invited me onto his website. We've produced a book together. We've done a little dog and pony show together. And I was mentioning how religion makes people behave worse. And I gave, as my example, one of the Old Testament commandment to exterminate the children of Amalek, down to the last one. And the only way you can incur the disapproval of the divinity is by leaving one child alive. A very stern disapproval, too, if you don't absolutely complete the extirpation. And Douglas, who's the rector of a big church in Moscow, Idaho, and a very important figure in Calvinist circles, says, well, yeah, but that commandment is absolutely valid. I take it very seriously, he said. If I could find an Amalekite, I'd be absolutely sure to rub him out, and down to the last kid. Now, then I know that here's someone who really thinks that these books are the Word of God. If I run into someone who says they may or may not be the Word of God, I like some bits about them, some bits are okay, make people behave more thoroughly, some bits not, well, we discard those bits. I begin to feel that there's something, well, a little morally slushy going on. It's like what the Catholics call the cafeteria Catholic, or the cafe Christian, the a la carte Christian. Yeah, well, I don't like the bit that says I've got to stone adulterers, but I do quite like the bit that says, come on. Is this stuff divine revelation or not? Has God revealed himself to us or not? Do we owe God a duty or not? Is morality what we think of as human solidarity ethics, or is it doing God's will? These questions demand answers. And I'm just not impressed by people who say we can have it any which way we like. That's hedonism, not religion.
I would say two things in response to that. The first is that it's interesting to me that the two extremes agree. That is, that the fundamentalists are under the impression that they follow everything in the Bible, and that the atheists are under the impression that it's only legitimate if you feel you follow everything in the Bible. In fact, life doesn't work that way, and neither does religion. If you say to somebody, for example, do you punish your children? The answer is never yes or no. It's under certain circumstances, if they do certain things. Sometimes I do, sometimes I do it this way, that's life. Life is complicated, life is messy, and if you will, life is slushy. It's not so simple as to say, this is the clear line, and that's what we always do. So, in fact, religious people don't want their ability to think taken away by the fact that somebody says, this is the only legitimate religious position, and anything to the left of that I find, what did you say, unimpressive. Some of the most impressive religious people I know actually think the commandments through for themselves and in their community, because their assumption is that this is a partnership. And that's why...
Partnership?
Yes.
With who?
With God. And that's why... I didn't make this up.
You didn't make that up?
No. It's called shutafut. It's, we'll go through it later. But that's why when Moses goes up, after breaking the tablets, and Moses goes up Sinai for the second time, it says that Moses wrote the second set of tablets. It doesn't say that God wrote the second set. God wrote the first set, then Moses writes the second set. And as the commentators point out, that's because God and human beings are partners in this world. As a Hasidic rabbi of a couple hundred years ago put it, God speaks in human language, and therefore we don't draw clear, bright lines, because life isn't that way. And when someone does, it makes me just as suspicious as it does for you when someone doesn't.
I can... Your whole congregation is in here somewhere.
Yeah. And let me tell you, they're all getting dues reductions.
Look, I could get... I would just appeal, I would just ask the audience to consider, if I wanted the moral pragmatism and relativism that we just heard, why would I want holy books to get there? To say, I decide on the merits and on case by case whether or how to punish a child. What do I need the Word of God for? What's the point of all this in that case? There's nothing awe-inspiring. There's nothing magnificent about it. It's just, hey, you can occasionally consult. If you don't like what you get, you don't have to enforce it. Well, why not just be a secularist? I mean, the thing I do like about Judaism is something that you haven't, in fact, chosen to stress, which is it does in some ways constitute, I would not say a partnership with God, but a willingness to rebel against him. That's different from Christianity and Islam. I mean, there's it's Rabbi Eliezer, I think, the debate about who's right about this question of the law, and he says, if I'm wrong, you know the story, let the river flow backwards, let the carob tree walk on its roots, let the roof of the temple fall in, and all these things happen. He still won't give up. He said, okay, if I'm wrong, let God say that I'm wrong. And God leans in and said, actually, you are wrong. You've been wrong all along. And Rabbi Eliezer says, well, not even God can decide this, because it's a matter of the law and of the majority in this meeting. And Elisha is supposed to have been asked later on, what did God think about all that? And he thought, well, it means the Jews are a bit more promising than some other groups of people I know. This is very nice, but don't you think it's a little bit anthropomorphic? Doesn't it suggest that we make God in our own image rather than the other way around? And wasn't that my point to begin with?
Well, first, I didn't actually anticipate as I was coming here this evening speaking these words, but I agree with Mr. Hitchens' Talmudic citations. What God says at the end of that story is, my children have defeated me, and the idea that people rebel against God is, I agree, I mean, from Abraham on, it is a beautiful and powerful idea, but I invite you to consider that it means nothing if there is no God against whom to rebel.
No, that would mean the story of Prometheus. Your congregation just grew a little bit. They'll clap anything.
I hope so. That's part of the intent of the whole...
No, you can rebel against the idea of God as being tyrannical. In order to admire Prometheus, stealing fire from heaven, and saying we break the monopoly on warmth and flame that is cruelly held by the gods. You don't have to believe that there are gods doing that. You just have to admire the spirit in which Prometheus is exerting himself. It would be just like saying, I can't say I'm an atheist without admitting that there's a God I don't believe in. No. That used to be known as the ontological proof. It's now known as the ontological fallacy, which is exactly what it actually is.
Well,
but you say you don't like Epicurus. There are things I don't like about him either, but the other great thing about Judaism, potentially, latently, is this. It says the struggle is between Athens and Jerusalem. The word for heretic is Epicurus, the Epicurean. So it forces people to confront the idea of Greek philosophy as a possible alternative explanation of reality, of the origins of the cosmos and of the species. And it's the reason, I presume, why the large majority of Jews in all countries have now become secular. Because their own religion taught them to think like Greeks. Not bad.
But in that
dialectical,
sense,
you might
Christopher,
say.
in that
Comrades,
sense,
dialectics at last.
what differentiates religion from any other human invention or endeavor, in the sense that, you know, anything we do is imperfect, anything we do runs in fads? Aren't we talking at the end of the day that religion is a tool, like logic is a tool, like politics is a tool, and humans can use or misuse any tool?
No, I don't think so, because it's a reification. It says you're born unfree. You're born with original sin or with a duty to a stern parent. And a stern parent who won't quit. Let me say what I mean. I mean, my education is actually more Christian than Jewish, but these things coincide to a certain extent. You're taught that you must love someone, and you owe a duty of love and respect to someone who you must also fear. There's something to me rather sinister in the idea of compulsory love that must be owed and paid as a debt to someone of whom you're slightly terrified.
You're just talking about Jewish mothers.
Well, yes, and who... Well, no, it's more the... In this case, it's more the joke about the speaking role. It's more the father. It's more the eternal father. If the idea of the eternal father doesn't worry you, it should, because I don't know what your life experiences have been, comrades, but some of you may have fathers living. I'm sure a lot of you have fathers who have died. But if you had a father who said to you, "I'm never going to die," how would you feel? Fond of the old man as you might be. I'm never going to die. Your grandchildren will never see me die either. Your great-grandchildren will never see me. I'm never going away. That's not parenthood. It's not fatherhood. It's tyranny. And what does it do to you? It infantilizes you. It means you can never grow up. And though my favorite example, my favorite metaphorical example of religious belief as the origin of totalitarianism compares God a bit more to Big Brother than Father, you'll see that the same point holds in that way too. So, who wants it to be true that they can never break away from an absolutely unalterable authority? It's quite different from every other man-made illusion. And I believe that the emancipation from it is the first emancipation that we have to conduct for ourselves. We can't be free till we break that chain.
I think that there's a certain impoverishment of... Oh, go ahead. I don't want to step on your congregation's
My wretched congregation.
applause. Right.
Some congregation.
Actually, that was my congregation. They're charitable by nature. I think there's a sort of impoverishment of imagination here, and I want you to see how this is working. I believe, no, I don't, but I'm going to step into my friend's shoes here. Can I call you that? Okay, thank you.
Help yourself.
Thank you. I'm going to try now. I believe that God is actually just a projection of my human father, and therefore the idea that God will never die terrifies me, because I know that if a human father never dies, it would be terrifying. Realize that this is an inversion of the way it actually works. The whole point is that God, we use the metaphor father for God because we can't conceive of what God is like. But it's not like having a human parent. The idea that you have a creator who loves you, who cares for you not only in this life but beyond, is anything but terrifying, and most religious people in healthy religion don't experience it as terrifying. They experience it as consoling. They experience it as powerful and meaningful, and it's very rare, I must tell you. I have been at the bedside of many people before they've died. It's very rare that someone has said to me, "Oh, dear God, I just hope that there is no God after I die, because that would be terrifying." In fact, the exact opposite is what I always hear, which is, look, Rabbi, I don't know what's going to happen to me after I die, but I really do hope that there is a God, because I hope that there is something after this, and I hope I will be embraced. And they don't think of it as a tyranny. They think of it as the opposite of a tyranny, which we call love.
But now I see with horrific clarity why you didn't like my mention of Sigmund Freud. I mean, Nietzsche is supposed to have said God was dead. Freud is supposed to have said God was dad. In the future of an illusion, his best essay on the subject, I think, he says that it's impossible to study religion without noticing its connection to wishful thinking. That people would like, as they expire, to think, I'm not going anywhere, I'm just going into the arms of a loving Father. Yeah, who wouldn't like to believe that? Who here decides what they believe on the basis of their wish, though, may I inquire? Do any of you decide to believe things because they would console you? What about a word like, hasn't come up yet in our discussion? Big, interesting, important word, begins with E, evidence. All the evidence is that the cosmos doesn't know we're here, that evolution doesn't know it's created us, that the stars don't look down on us, that there is no one who knows about or cares about or supervises our existence, that we have to face this on our own responsibility. That all the evidence is that way. There is no serious evidence any other way, but there is a strong desire that we could abolish and dissolve our responsibility and just relax and say, well, I'm so glad that as I check out, Daddy will be taking care of me.
I've got some evidence.
I don't think it's moral to be preaching that kind of thing. I'm sorry to say, and I think it's positively immoral to be preaching it to people who are ill, suffering, and defenseless. I think it's hateful to tell lies to people who are in that condition.
What would you tell them?
I would not encourage them to delude themselves.
I just want to say,
and when my turn comes, I won't listen to any rubbish of that kind.
I want you to... Oh, go ahead.
I could not possibly be more serious about it.
You executed a very clever two-step there, and I just want to illustrate it. First, you said to believe in God is to believe in a stern totalitarian father, and when I pointed out that that's not the religious belief, you said, aha, to believe in God is wishful thinking, which is not true. Now, you can't have both.
Yes, I can.
Yes, you can, right. So let's take number two, where you said there's absolutely no evidence that the universe knows we're coming. Actually, there's two kinds of evidence. The first is that the universe exists in the first place, which, as you know, is an extraordinarily improbable event. Just look at a book like Martin Rees's Just Six Numbers, where he talks about, as many astrophysicists do, the odds that the universe would actually be constituted are 0.0000 to the billionth power, because all these various astronomical constants have to be exactly right, balanced on a knife edge, in order for there to be a world. So that's the first piece of evidence that the world knew we were coming. And the second piece of evidence is consciousness, which is, how do you get consciousness from inanimate stuff? If the world is composed only of stuff, how do you get ideas? How do you get my throwing sounds up into the air and somehow you catch them and your minds are changed or not changed by them? In fact, I think there's a lot of good evidence, if you want to open yourself to this possibility, that not only did the universe know we were coming, but it made provision for us, and if you'll allow me to, is glad we're here.
No, I won't allow you to. By no means permit that. But first, to your first point,
yes,
there's no contradiction whatever in saying that the image of God as a totalitarian dictator and the image of God as a benign paternalist are contradictory. There's absolutely no difference between the two concepts. What dictatorship has not said that it's there for benevolence? That is the selling point of dictatorship. You don't have to worry. You don't have to vote. You don't have to be citizens. You don't have to think. We'll publish the newspapers for you. You don't have to publish your own. We'll do that all for you. That's the whole point. You're not needed. You're just there to applaud and to thank. That's the whole point to begin with. The whole horror, to me, of a dictatorship would be that it would say it was for my own good. That's exactly the denial of liberty that I was trying to talk about. So, no, those concepts are the same. Now to this knife edge point. Why are people so impressed that it so nearly didn't happen? Some designer, I might mention, on the knife edge point. Knife edge is exactly the right metaphor, as it turns out. Just in the little far-off suburban slum of our tiny solar system, that's a detail in the cosmos, just the one we know the following, that of the other planets, all of them are either much too hot or much too cold to support any kind of life at all. If they ever did, they don't any longer and will never do so again. And that is true of very large tracts of our own planet. They're either too hot or too cold, and it's on a climatic knife edge as it is, and is waiting for the sun to swell up into a red dwarf, boil the oceans, and have done with the whole business. And we even know roughly the date on which that will occur. That's just in our suburb. It's in our hood. So we may have a little bit of somethingness now, but there's a great deal of nothingness headed our way. Some design, huh? They were waiting for us. It was waiting for us to occur, for you and me to arrive. 98.9% of every species that's ever been on Earth has already become extinct. So if there's a creator or designer, and I can't prove there isn't, who wanted that, this designer must be either very capricious, very cruel, very incompetent, or very indifferent. Grant him, and you must grant all that. You can't say, oh, what a welcome. What a table was spread for us to dine at. And then...
may I...
and you know what? I'm going to have to ask you something.
Go ahead.
Do you or do you not... Well, I'll say one thing and I'll ask you another. In the night sky, ladies and gentlemen, you can already see Lawrence Krauss's columns on this and on the rate at which the universe is continuing to expand, the red shift, the way at which the Big Bang is still blowing us hugely further apart so that you can see the heat death of the universe actually coming. We know the date of that too. Well, in the night sky, you can now see the Andromeda Galaxy headed on direct course for us. It's coming. We know the date when that will happen too. That's when our somethingness, even more nothingness, will... It's just a matter of which of these occurs first. So that's what the capital E evidence is, and there's no counter-evidence for it. So I have to ask you a relatively trivial question, but it's one with major implications. Do you think that Jewish people have a special covenant with God?
Okay,
not?
So good. Now,
do you?
Well, hold it. No, you can't give a 5-minute speech and then say yes or no. I will answer that question. I will answer the question. Just a minute. No, just a minute. First of all,
I didn't say you had to say yes.
First of all,
but if you did say yes,
hold on. First of all, I want to go back to the original. If we can cast our minds back to those olden days when you started talking about that a dictator can be both loving and fearsome, because, and I wrote down your words, you're just there to applaud and to thank. No religion, and certainly not Judaism, tells you that. You're there to be good, to make the world better. You're not supposed to be quiescent. You're not supposed to be a servile follower. You're supposed to do good deeds in this world. After all, that's what most of Jewish law is about. It's about how we treat each other. So this notion that, I mean, in the same way that a parent says, treat your brother nicely, if that's under orders, yes, you get to obey it or disobey it, but there is a moral order. That's the whole idea of orders. Wait, you hold it. You'll get your chance, I promise. I know you will.
No, I'm just rolling my eyes.
Second, okay, eye rolling is fine. We do that. I mean, just to ask my congregation. Second, you said, why should we be impressed that it almost didn't happen? Well, that's exactly what's impressive, right? What's exactly impressive is when a juggler almost doesn't catch it, but does catch it. What's impressive is that it's very improbable that the universe would be created, yet it is. Now, you point out that there's, evidence that the world is expanding and will be destroyed. I hate to invoke him, but it's so appropriate here. Remember Woody Allen's movie Annie Hall. So, in Annie Hall, there's this wonderful scene where he remembers himself as a kid. And he won't do his homework. And his mother says, why won't you do your homework? And he says, because the universe is expanding. And she says to him, Brooklyn is not expanding. And I bring this up because...
No, she adds, what is it, your business?
Right. I bring this up because, first of all, it does not invalidate the value of human life that in 500 million years, this part of the solar system may not be here. And, look, there is a midrash, there's a rabbinic story that God created and destroyed many worlds before this one. It says nothing about where we will be in 500 million years. We may be elsewhere. The design, in fact, may be more intricate, complicated than you might suppose. As to whether the Jews have a special covenant with God, my answer to that is absolutely, but that does not preclude other people having special covenants with God. The idea is not only the Jews have a special covenant with God. The idea is that it is possible for human beings, for groups, for religions to create a special kind of relationship that gives them a special mission in this world. So for me, it's not a problem, because it's not actually my job to argue Judaism's superiority. It's my job to argue its excellence, and part of that excellence is our covenant.
You want to answer?
No.
Okay.
Just wanted to hear him say it.
Let's talk a little bit about, since you mentioned history and evidence. David, when the historical record clashes with religious myth, why do people of faith choose story over history? And what can religious leaders do to encourage a more enlightened form of religious practice and thinking that takes history into account? Christopher mentioned the Greeks and the Jews, and we're coming up on Hanukkah, which has a very specific dark history, and yet we celebrate it in this kind of happy, light way. But how could you go about taming that religious impulse to disregard facts and history?
Well, I think that, this is a question dear to my heart, as you know. It seems to me that one ought not to preclude the other. That is, that we ought to teach, to take Hanukkah for an example, we ought to teach both what happened and also what we learned from it, good and bad. That if you make a historical claim, it deserves to be evaluated by history, but a historical claim does not invalidate a spiritual or religious claim, and they operate to some extent, even though they are somewhat interdependent, they also operate on different levels. And that's, the way you teach that is by teaching it. The way you teach that is by telling people, and by submitting that which can be submitted to evidence.
As far as I understand it, the Hanukkah story isn't particularly discredited as a historical one. I mean, it is a rebellion by Jewish fundamentalism against the Hellenization of Palestine. It's the restoration of orthodoxy by force, by the Maccabees. Obviously, a lot of it has accretions of myth and legend to it, but something like that certainly did happen, and it's regarded by people like myself as a great tragedy that the Jews did not continue with Hellenization, because I think that humanity would have been hugely better off if Jews had turned to Athens and away from the smoldering altars and the circumcisions and the animal sacrifices. And
we could have had slavery in the Peloponnesian War and the Melian massacre.
Whole lot better.
Yeah.
Whole lot better if they'd...
Depends what you want, depends what you want.
Well, it's taken a long time, but that's the way that most Jews have, in fact, decided to resolve it. And I don't think you can say that that's been a mistake, because all of the real impressive achievements have been in diaspora and in secular society.
But
by turning away from the ghetto and from rabbinical control.
Do you not...
And from the fear of a non-existent God.
Do you not believe that a great deal of the achievements of Jews in all areas of life have been motivated by religious ideologies and religious ideas, by prophetic ideas, by ideas of commandment and Torah and so on? I mean, it seems to me that
Absolutely don't think that.
You don't think so?
No, I don't. I think the heroic age of the Jewish people begins with the excommunication of Baruch Spinoza.
Okay.
Everything starts with that. Oh, I'm sorry. I say that the heroic age of Jewish emancipation and of Jewish contribution to science, medicine, philosophy, everything else begins with the moment when the fools in the Amsterdam synagogue decide to get rid of Baruch Spinoza and describe him as a revolting heretic and make him go through a form of capital punishment and attract for this the applause and approbation of the Protestant and Catholic authorities. Jewish emancipation from anti-Semitism and from ghettoization begins with Spinoza. And it means leaving behind. It means leaving behind all the horrors of the rabbinical dictatorship.
You know, this is a question that I've been wanting to ask religious scholars and atheist scholars for a while, and I'll tell you why. Because I don't think we'd be having this conversation if, at least not with the same intensity, if it weren't for what happened on September 11th, 2001. So on that day when 19 men took 3 different airplanes and each one prayed to God that they would succeed, you had passengers on those 3 airplanes terrified, praying to God for those men to fail. So I guess my question to David is, if prayer works, how did it work that day? And my question to you, Christopher, is, if those people didn't have prayer in those last moments, what would you suggest they do? Either one.
Okay, so I think that for both of them, if you believe that prayer, I mean, look, I understand in a moment of desperation that people pray that there will be a sort of magical intervention in the world. But I don't believe that that's how prayer works, and I don't believe that most people who pray day to day in healthy faith believe that this is a sort of slot machine that you know, where you have good odds that if you pull the lever enough times, you'll get the result. For myself and for people I know who've gone through difficult times and sickness, I know that what you pray for is intimacy and closeness and that you not be alone. I don't believe that because I was sick and prayed that God said, okay, well, Wolpe prayed, so I'm going to save him. In fact, I believe what Leona Medina said already in the 17th century, and he's following a long tradition of commentary. I mean, even in the Talmud, it says that there's no reward for mitzvot in this world, which the rabbis understood. What Leona Medina says is if you saw a man who was pulling his boat towards the shore and you were mistaken about sort of mechanics and motion, you might think that he was pulling the shore towards his boat. And the same thing's true of prayer. A lot of people pray and when they think that they're changing God, but actually if they pray well, what they're doing is changing themselves. And if you ask me, just as in every other human activity, there's good prayer and there's bad prayer. The prayer that says, God, help me kill these people, is distancing you from God. The prayer that at the last moment people say because they know that they're facing their death and they don't want to face it alone is the prayer that draws you close from God. And I have no doubt that those prayers were, in this sense, answered.
There was a Sufi imam in 13th century Basra, in today's Iraq and Mesopotamia, whose prayer was, "Oh God, if I believe in you for my fear of hell, send me to hell. If I believe in you because of my wish for heaven, deny me heaven." So he was asking to be given responsibility. I would say that wasn't a prayer or even a mantra. I'd say that was a decent reflection. You're, of course, quite right that on the 11th of September 2001, we were forced yet again, as we are all the time, to confront the fact that faith by itself doesn't deserve respect, as we keep saying it does, that faith on its own is another form of fanaticism or substitution of belief for reason, and that's a sign of what a poorly evolved primate, mammalian species we are. The rabbi earlier appeared to pour contempt on the idea that we should think of ourselves as animals. Well, again, evidence counts, ladies and gentlemen. We are half a chromosome away from being chimpanzees, and don't you think it shows? Yes, of course we are animals. We're I think, a qualitatively as well as quantitatively better primate, but primates is what we are, and we know it. We even have the DNA to absolutely establish it. Nothing to be proud of or ashamed of, but a fact not to be denied. Now, we're lucky that there were people on one of those planes who didn't pray at all. They got out of their seats and they said, we're not going to let this plane fly into the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. We're willing to give our lives to prevent people who are willing to commit suicide, in order to prevent that happening. No time to pray. Time to act. Very important. That's what we should be grateful for. If they'd all fallen to their knees and invoked the deity, the plane would have hit the Capitol on an election day, by the way, primary day in New York, and I think during a joint session of both houses of Congress. And in case you don't know this, I live in Washington, D.C. That dome isn't made of marble, it's made of wrought iron. It would have melted on top of our legislators. We'd never have got over it. Now, Douglas Wilson, my Christian antagonist, the other day said to me, see what a nihilist Hitchens is. He thinks that over Auschwitz there was only sky. He doesn't think that Hitler would be judged. Now again, I didn't say I didn't wish he'd be judged. I said I don't think he was going to be. And he certainly didn't act, even though he had the blessings of Christianity and the Pope behind him. And no one in his party was ever even threatened with excommunication for taking part in the final solution. He didn't act as if he feared such a judgment. And the best book, in my view, on the final solution, the Endlosen, the Shoah, is Arno Mayer's book, Why Did the Heavens Not Darken? Well, I think this is a stupid question, because unfortunately there was only sky over Auschwitz. Heaven was indifferent in that moment. You didn't have to tremble at the thought that God was just. You had to tremble at the thought there wasn't a just God. A much worse tremble, if you see what I mean. But it's not all bad news, because it does mean that those who crash planes full of living people into buildings full of living people, shouting that God is great and believing it's going to get them to paradise, aren't going to get there.
About that,
one is only
about
sorry.
That we agree.
One is only sorry, and very sorry in my case, that there's no moment, at the moment of their extinction, there's no moment when they think, damn, it isn't. But wishful thinking can't help that either. So my settled verdict on this is, they want to die, and I'm here to help them do so. And so should you be, and everyone in this room should be ashamed until they've done something to kill at least one jihadist or bring about the physical and moral and political and military defeat and humiliation of these people. And the God in which they believe. And the non-existent deity in which they dare to take permission to try and kill us all.
Christopher, have you ever prayed?
Once for a hard-on. And I don't know whether it worked or not.
As a rabbi, I may be wrong, but I thought you said that I was obsessed with Freud.
I'm not going to tell you what happened, and I don't know whether it was the prayer in either case.
Does prayer work?
But you had to ask, so I have to tell.
I'm going to give you both a chance to give some concluding statements, but before I do that, I wanted to ask one last question.
No, I've shot my bolt now, I think. Yes, please.
Do either of you see, I mean, it's my job as a moderator to ask this, but it's also where I'm coming from. Do either of you see a middle ground where religion and secularism can borrow from the best insights of the other?
Oh, I think unquestionably, in fact, that the middle ground exists right here. The middle ground exists right here. Maybe not on stage so much, but a religious society that is pluralistic and democratic and yet is inspired by the goodness that religion creates. Because again, the truth is that in study after study, it's not just that religious people volunteer more. It's not just that they donate more blood. It's also they have more stable families. They have lower levels of drug and alcohol dependence. I mean, religion, it works in people's lives. I believe it works in people's lives because it's true, but also it does work in people's lives. So there is no question that a pluralistic, democratic, and religiously vibrant state is going to be a healthier, better place, even in places, by the way, since let me anticipate a question you didn't ask. Places like Sweden and Denmark, where people say, oh, well, they're completely secular and look how well they do. Are you aware of the fact that the vast majority of people in Sweden and Denmark, although they say they don't believe in God, identify themselves as Christians, have their kids baptized, get married in churches? The social solidarity that religion creates is not, in fact, substitutable by a secular lack of belief that says humanism will in fact bind us all together. The only thing that will bind human beings together is a transcendent ideal, something that in fact implicates all of us. Black, white, brown, yellow, Jew, Christian, Muslim, Sikh. What makes them all one? Not the idea that we're all one chromosome away from a chimpanzee. That doesn't create in me any moral obligation to you. It creates a curiosity about you, but no moral obligation. The only thing that creates a moral obligation that I cannot turn away from, that I have to do even when it's to my disadvantage, is that you're a child of God. Therefore, you're my brother or you're my sister. If that's not true, why should I be kind to you when it's to my disadvantage? Why should I care about you if I'm never going to see you again? Why should I leave, to take a trivial example, why should I leave that tip in the hotel room for the maid that I don't know, that I don't see, that I'm never going to see, and walk out impoverished by whatever number of dollars I leave her? Why should I do it? There's no reason to if all I am is a trick of chromosomes. We are animals, that's true, but we are not just animals. We're also images of God, and that's why we owe each other this moral obligation, and without it, we don't.
Well then, you'll have to come up with an answer to my challenge, which you've heard before, which I've put to the Archbishop of Canterbury in person, I've put in print and put in... Sorry. Okay. Then the rabbi will have to come up with an answer to my challenge, which he's heard before, which I've put in person to the Archbishop of Canterbury, many senior religious figures in real life, real time, and I've put in print and on air many, many times. It's this. If you believe the extraordinary claim that Rabbi Wolpe just made, you'll simply have to do this. It'll be easy for you. Think of a moral statement made or a moral action performed by a believer that I couldn't perform.
My turn?
No. I'm letting it sink into them, and I'm telling them there's a prize. Okay? No one's ever come up with it yet. There's a corollary, by the way, question. Think of a wicked thing done by a religious person that's done because of their religion. Or a wicked statement made by a religious person done purely because they are people of faith. You've already thought of one. No one's ever come up with an answer to my first one. I don't make the chromosomal point as a moral one. I say it's dangerous to say that we mustn't act as if we were primates, because we must not act as if we don't know this. Now, why do I like to give blood? I can tell you easily. It gives me pleasure to give someone else blood, and I give a pint, but I don't lose it. I have a cup of hot tea, lie down, have some water. I've got my pint back in a couple of hours. They've benefited. I haven't lost. It's an almost perfect socialist logarithm. And I feel good about having done it.
And it's red.
And I will add, and I will add that I have a rare blood group myself, and I might need a blood donation myself one day. And I'd like to think that other people would be feeling the same way. There's nothing required except the obligations of human solidarity, which are not just chromosomal or mammalian. They're a little more noble than that, but I don't need divine permission to behave like this. What I need divine permission for was to say, I'll shed your blood because you're an Amalekite, or I will make your penis bleed because you haven't been genitally mutilated yet, so you're not down with the covenant. That's something, an immoral action, that you would require a divine ordinance to occur. So, now, I was answering your question in reverse order. I'll be quick. Common ground. I don't look for common ground. What I look for is polarization and contradiction, because that's how progress is made. And of course, the best way to make a progress in an argument about anthropology, philosophy, morality, ethics, is with the religious. Absolutely. It's the necessary argument. Religion was our first and our worst explanation of things. It's what we thought before we had a germ theory of disease, before we knew that we lived on a cooling planet or around one, before we knew we lived in a solar system, before we knew any of this. It was our first attempt. Anyone who wants to think has to have a confrontation with religion. I'm not looking for common ground. No, that's silly. That's just compromise. That's bipartisanship. That's not appropriate for this kind of thing. No, I'm looking for the kind of intellectual combat where heat produces light. And after all, light doesn't come from any other source but heat.
So, I actually believe that I answered Mr. Hitchens' challenge. He doesn't think so. I'm going to leave it to you, and then I'm going to make my last quick comment, and then I think we're wrapping it up. The question is not, can believers do things that non-believers can't? Because after all, if you reverse it and you say, do believers do things that non-believers don't in wicked ways, they may do things that non-believers don't, like say, I will kill you because of God. But that's something a non-believer could do, that is, they're physically able to. The question isn't whether believers are suddenly physically able to do things that non-believers can't. It's not that believers can fly and non-believers can't, even though in the Middle Ages they claimed miracles. But, I mean, believers and non-believers have the same physiology. But there are things believers do that non-believers don't do, that are moral actions. Some of them are great works of art, right? There's great religious poetry, there's great religious music that non-believers would never have produced. There are also moral actions like Shiva minions after somebody dies. There are actions like praying around the bed of somebody who is dying, which even if you don't believe changes God, comforts the person who's dying. So there are, in fact, actions that human beings that are religious take that people who are not religious never do take. And that seems to me a perfectly adequate answer. I'm surprised if the Archbishop didn't say the same thing, but it seems to me a perfectly adequate answer to the challenge. And let me finish with this. It's not true that heat is the only source of light. In fact, in Genesis, God waits to create the sun, but on the very first day before there is a sun, there is darkness and there is light. There is a light in the world that's not a chemical light, that is not generated by stuff. It's a light that everybody here acknowledges exists. It's a light that exists inside you. You may, in fact, sometimes deny it, but it's real. And that light comes from something beyond the sun, something greater, and you are part of that something greater. And realize that in the name of a spurious nobility, what, in fact, atheism is doing is diminishing you, not ennobling you, saying that you are less than you are. Don't accept it. The greatest sin, according to an old Hasidic statement, that a human being can make is to forget that they are children of the Creator. In other words, to feel yourself as less than something eternal is to make yourself little, to make yourself small, to make yourself unknoble, to make yourself something that no human being, having reached so far after so long, should do, which is to believe in the non-transcendence of human beings. I'll close by telling you something that Heschel once said. Abraham Joshua Heschel, the Jewish theologian, asked why Judaism prohibits idolatry. He said, after all, people think that idolatry is an insult to God. You create this statue, and you say that's God, and God gets insulted. He says, but look, God is God. It's not going to hurt God to insult God. The question is that there actually exists in this world an image of God. It's in every human face. And when you point to the products of human beings and say, that's eternal, it's not that you're insulting God. It's that you're insulting yourself. And that you're not permitted to do. And you shouldn't let anyone else do it either.
I mean, it's been remarked about Genesis that God says, let there be light, and then later says there's sun, moon, and stars. And some people think that's a contradiction. Where did the light come before the sun, moon, and stars? Well, if you think, which I didn't suspect that you did, that Genesis is a literal account of creation, then that would be one metaphor for the Big Bang. It certainly did precede the formation of sun, moon, stars, or any other celestial bodies. But I think that the account given by Stephen Hawking of that is much more persuasive and more convincing than the account in Genesis. In other words, you don't need the Creator account. We have further and better and more beautiful and more awe-inspiring and more transcendent explanations than the burning bush or the finger of God or Noah's flood. The same is true, I think, and I'm very glad this point's come up, though I'm sorry it's come up at the end, of the idea that only religion can lead to beauty or aesthetics. For example, Verdi did compose a wonderful requiem, and many other devotional pieces of music. Didn't believe in God at all, but he could do that. I think that example on its own means your case falls, because it's not necessary to be a person of faith to produce devotional work. We only know of the great period of Baroque and Renaissance painting and architecture and music and so on, that it would be very, very dangerous indeed to be a practicing artist or composer and to be an atheist. In fact, it wouldn't just be you wouldn't get much business sent your way. You might have a very protracted and painful death that would also be inflicted upon your family. So that you should choose a test like that as one of religious contribution to the ethical life. Do you know what happened to painters and writers and architects and thinkers who didn't affirm the Trinity in those days? Do you know what happened if you were Jewish in Spain and said, I don't subscribe to the prevailing orthodoxy, but I'd still like to be able to publish or to do? You know, come on. How dare anybody say this proves the connection between religion and morality? It's a scandalous thing for the rabbi to have averred. And to say, well, oh yes, I can think of another moral thing that believers do that non-believers don't. They pray around deathbeds. Excuse me, that's not even a tautology. So I'm sorry to say that my challenge still stands, and it seems to me to have become a little more salient, given the rather morally horrible accounts of the matter that the rabbi has just given. Now, just on this point of transcendence and numinousness, I think it's a big cultural task. I wrote a book about the Parthenon, available at fine bookstores everywhere. I think the Parthenon is an extraordinary building. I don't think it could have been done without people of faith, in a sense. Their faith was in the cult of Pallas Athena, and also in the cult of the Eleusinian mysteries, and of, to a secondary, tertiary extent, Athenian imperialism. Otherwise, it couldn't have got done. Well, I appreciate the Parthenon very much. Its wonderful symmetries, its extraordinary sculptures, and so forth. But I take no part or stock at all in the worship of Pallas Athena, neither do you, or in the Eleusinian mysteries, which may have included human sacrifice, probably did, or in Athenian imperialism. The great cultural task is indeed to separate what is in us artistic, aesthetic, numinous, transcendent, from the supernatural, the superstitious, and the cognate word for that, the barbaric. And there I'll stop.